of Global Business Africa. As always, it's good to see you. In the next hour, we're going to run through all the business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. Before that, though, we'll start with a run through the markets here for you. Let's focus on ShopRite for a moment, shall we? It's facing the prospect of having to pay a fine worth 10% of its turnover for anti-competitive behaviour in ticket sales. That recommendation is coming from South Africa's Competition Commission, but the final call will come from the Competition Tribunal. Remember, this is a business with over $10 billion in revenue, so if the fine stands, that's going to be quite the hit. Its shares are closed the session at 3.1% lower. The fall year to date is 18.3%. Here's what's coming up tonight. We'll look at the implications of AngloGold's possible listing in either London or Toronto. Facebook is in trouble yet again for allegedly misusing your personal data. And we'll show you how Zimbabweans in South Africa plan to send some Christmas cheer back to their loved ones in Zimbabwe. Right then, so let's start tonight in the world of mining, where AngloGold Ashanti is considering listing its shares in either London or Toronto. That move could essentially see the company hive off its remaining South African operations. There's no final decision on this as yet, but the world's third largest gold producer has been discussing the plan internally and with external advisors too. AngloGold is currently listed in Johannesburg and it has depository receipts that also trade in New York. The producer does favour a London listing, although that's unlikely to happen before 2020. As part of these deliberations, the company is looking for ways to exit existing South African operations before moving the listing. All right, then, so let's get more data on this from CGTN's Sumitra Naidu. She joins us now live from Johannesburg with more data. Sumitra, so AngloGold shares are doing particularly well, up 39% so far this year, strong rally carrying through from August, and that's despite spot gold prices falling by 3% over the same period. What is it that investors love about this company?
Well, Ramah, we saw the rand weaken significantly in this period, which led to some solid gains. But as you say, the gold price has been falling, and now this is not new. Gold hasn't done particularly well in the last 2 years, and there has been quite a bit happening on the international front. Lots of uncertainty, concerns about global growth, Brexit, the US-China trade spat, and often when there's turmoil, you see investors buy gold as a safe haven. But I think when we're looking just at AngloGold Ashanti, the main reason it did actually post some solid third quarter results. It improved output production. It also managed to lower costs significantly, and therefore it reduced its debt by 15%. A few reports on the stock was moved from a sell to hold and even to buy. There were some big institutional investors that bought that stock recently, so we did see a bit of a rally there.
Indeed. So in 2007, about 43% or so of its total output was coming just from one country, South Africa. But now that's fallen, based on the data we saw in the third quarter, to about 14%. Operations elsewhere in Africa account for about 46% of output. But what's the investment plan in gold mines around the world, and how do costs out there compare to South Africa?
Well, the South African landscape remains tricky. There's still gold in the ground, but it's deep, it's dangerous, and it's costly to get that metal out. Production has been declining over the years. The gold sector used to be the largest contributor to GDP. It's now struggling to make any decent contribution. Many of the mines have become unprofitable, and there's been thousands of job losses in the sector. And this is because of declining investment, ongoing wrangles with the unions, higher wages, more stringent safety measures, labor unrest, strikes. Gold mining is still doing well in other parts of the world, but it's not very attractive to investors in South Africa at the moment. For all of these reasons, people have been, holding on the sidelines, waiting for more certainty in the sector. But it doesn't make business sense for them to continue mining here.
Indeed. So as far back as 2014, AngloGold had made it clear they wanted to downsize their footprint in South Africa, reduce their assets as much as they can in that country. So what's the glide path along that process?
Well, that's right. The company placed all of its assets under review due to underperformance. That led to heavy losses. Most of its operations were unsustainable. So it sold off some of the mines to Harmony Gold last year. It sold off more mines this year. And it's been a combination of factors that led to these losses. Some of its mines had aging infrastructure. Output was lower, production stoppages because of accidents. There was also a reserve depletion at some of the older mines. There's also been quite a bit of uncertainty in the sector, lack of clarity around the mining charter. You know, the changes and the delays went on for years. The final charter was only released recently. So many of the miners were reluctant to invest, and expansion and improvements all put on hold. We've also been struggling with electricity supply in recent years. This has had a huge impact for on industrial users, the miners in particular. So a lot of this also led to that. You know, the company is starting to make good headway now, but that's only because it's streamlined its operations so much and it's cut out costs and it's sold off the mines.
Indeed, and of course with all the load shedding that might continue to January, that's going to be a continuing problem. One last question for you. From the firm's perspective, what is the advantage to be had by listing either in London or in the markets in Toronto compared to the existing listing it has at the JSE?
So, Ramah, for any company that wants to list on the market, any market in the world, the first question they ask is, why are we doing it? And that's usually because they want to raise capital. And it seems that AngloGold Ashanti is no longer confident that it can raise any of that capital in South Africa. It's a rather poor indictment, sadly. But at the end of the day, these big companies have shareholders to answer to. There's just too much uncertainty in South Africa, especially with the land issue now. Land expropriation without compensation is going ahead. Analysts say this is a major concern. Why stay and build or expand on your operation if there's even a slim chance that the state could come later on and claim it? Eskom's poor state and inability to ensure stable power supply is also a major problem. And of course, London is still a really big financial center. Of course, they're looking elsewhere to see, where they can be better placed. And South Africa doesn't seem to be that place anymore for them.
Indeed, we'll have to see how this plays out. Thank you for the update. That's Sumitra Naidu there live in Johannesburg. Now, we're still in South Africa. The country's not, I repeat that, it's not knocking on the IMF's door, despite some pretty bad economic conditions and rising debt, as well as other factors. For example, unemployment. It hit 27.5% in the third quarter. The IMF, however, has praised South Africa's efforts to fight corruption and restore good governance, especially in government. IMF Chief Christine Lagarde was in South Africa this week. While there, she met the President, the Governor of the Reserve Bank, and the rest of the government's core economic team. CGTN's Sumitra Naidu has the details.
The IMF chief made a quick stopover in South Africa. The visit raised eyebrows and widespread concerns that Christine Lagarde was here to talk about a possible loan, suggesting just how much trouble South Africa is in. But she confirmed this was not the case.
The IMF chief insisted that this was a routine visit to South Africa, as she does with other G20 countries, and that no loans were discussed, even for cash-strapped Eskom.
I am not here to discuss any kind of financial support or to negotiate any kind of program, and I have not received any request to that effect. So that's crystal clear, and I hope it puts to bed some of the rumors or noises that I have seen here and there about this particular matter.
Lagarde also firmly stated that there would be no loans for Eskom because the IMF only deals with countries and not companies. The state-owned power utility is in a dire financial position, and despite several government loans and bailouts, it now needs a further $1 billion. Eskom's inability to ensure a stable power supply could tip the economy back into recession. But the IMF chief said she was pleased with the president's anti-corruption drive and expressed confidence that these measures will help restore growth in the economy.
It is critically important to have institutions that are strong, that have the bench, the depth and the determination to actually conduct that exercise, eliminating leakages, removing exemptions when there are too many of them, and making sure that public money is actually properly collected and properly spent, and that there is accountability in the process.
Earlier this year, the IMF lowered its growth forecast for South Africa to 0.8% from its initial estimation of 1%. The Reserve Bank's forecast is lower at 0.6%. Growth is still very weak and debt is rising. Record high unemployment, too, is a major worry. But it seems President Ramaphosa has a plan to tackle these challenges head-on without having to knock on the IMF's door. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Pretoria, South Africa.
Right, and our company news wrap starts in the business of arms. The South African state asset manager, the PIC, has bought up almost 90% of cash-strapped arms manufacturer Denel's bonds in the last 12 months. Now, the previously undisclosed funding by the PIC, the Public Investment Corporation, sheds new light on just how precarious Denel's financial health really is. As of the 14th of December this year, the PIC owned around $196 million of Denel bonds out of the company's total issuance of $222 million. Sibanye-Stillwater and Lonmin say they will be looking for an urgent hearing from the Competition's Appeals Court. This comes after the Association of Mine Workers and Construction Union, AMCU, filed an appeal against a decision by that body approving the merger of the two firms. Now, the companies argue that the merger will create a more resilient mining company with great geographical and commodity diversification. Elsewhere, Total has announced plans to start exports of crude oil from a major new offshore field in Nigeria. This comes at a time when oil prices are falling due to oversupply. Initial exports could start at about 100,000 or so barrels a day, but that could double in the months to come. The first export is expected to take place in February 2019. And finally, Elon Musk recently took the wraps off his Boring company's first completed test tunnel. It was built at a cost of about $40 million, money which the tech investor says came right out of his own pocket. Boring is currently in exclusive negotiations with the city of Chicago to build a loop connecting the city's downtown O'Hare International Airport. We'll bring you more details on this project a little later in the program. That's a run through your company headlines. It's time now for a short break. Here is what's coming up next. We'll explore ties between Tunisia and Saudi Arabia. Why are they getting better now? And South Africa hopes relaxed visa regulations will boost tourism numbers during the holidays.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sumitra Naidu. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in.
See, business in Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Ucheo Koronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Welcome back to the programme. Let's head over to North Africa, Tunisia to be specific. The country's Prime Minister Youssef Chahed has spoken positively about growing political and economic ties with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The Saudi government is pledged to provide $830 million in financial aid to the North African state. CGTN's Adin Chouachi has the details.
Tunisian authorities have described the visit of Premier Youssef Chahed and several cabinet members to Saudi Arabia last week as successful. Chahed had a talk in Riyadh with King Salman bin Abdulaziz.
The meeting focused on ways to scale up cooperation in several priority areas, particularly finance, development and investments, as well as security and military cooperation to address threats of terrorism and extremism. Tunisia welcomes Saudi investors.
A Tunisian-Saudi business forum was held at the Council of Saudi Chambers. Several agreements were signed at the high-level meeting.
Over the past decades, Saudi Arabia has invested massively in Tunisia. Returning to Tunisia is an important step for businesses in the two countries. Tunisia opens the door for Saudi investments. We are pleased to work with Tunisian partners.
Saudi Arabia has pledged financial aid to Tunisia worth $830 million. The Prime Minister said that $500 million was expected to finance the budget, $230 million to finance foreign trade, and about $100 million to finance projects.
We will double trade and economic exchange between Saudi Arabia and brotherly Tunisia. Investment reached $277 million in 2017. The Tunisian Premier shed light on incentives, advantages and preferential tariffs for Saudi investors.
According to the Tunisian Prime Ministry, a number of Arab, regional and international issues of common interest were discussed in Riyadh, along with preparations underway for the 30th Arab Summit, set for next March in Tunis, and efforts made to ensure its success given the major challenges facing the Arab world.
Tunisian authorities aim to welcome more Saudi tourists at beach resorts in the coastal cities and the Sahara resorts in the south. According to data from the Ministry of Tourism, their number has decreased from thousands of visitors in 2010 to hundreds in 2018. Adin Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has unveiled a federal budget worth $28.8 billion for the country's 2019 fiscal year. He presented that budget to a joint session of the National Assembly in Abuja. CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam was there.
The economy has recovered from recession.
President Muhammadu Buhari presenting the 2019 budget estimates to a raucous House of lawmakers. The 2019 budget is President Buhari's last under his first four-year term. He's hoping to advance his strategic recovery and growth agenda should he win next year's presidential votes. In the past 4 years, his administration has battled to lift Africa's largest economy out of recession. But overall, the economy has remained fragile and heavily dependent on crude oil exports. And the opposition is making a big deal out of it.
Real gross domestic product growth stood at 1.81% in the third quarter of 2018, compared to 1.7% in the third quarter of 2017. We have had a sustained accretion to foreign exchange reserves from a low of $28.57 billion United States dollars in May 2015 to $42.92 billion by December 2018.
The 2019 budget is the blueprint of President Buhari's development plan should he win the coming elections. It comes only months after a mass defection of lawmakers from the president's ruling APC party. The booing he has received is a pointer that the content of the proposal will form the basis for political campaigns in the coming months. About $5 billion will also go to debt servicing, and another $5 billion of the budget has been allocated to infrastructural development.
Modern, up-to-date infrastructure is particularly important to boost economic activity. We will continue with our emphasis on power, roads, and rail. In addition to completing the Ibadan-Kano rail line, we will also embark and move rapidly to complete the Eastern Rail from Port Harcourt to Maiduguri.
The 2019 budget will have to get lawmakers' approval before it could be implemented. Previous budgets have been delayed by months, which explains why part of the 2019 expenditure would be a substantial overlap from the 2018 budget. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
A quick pit stop now in Africa's youngest country. South Sudan has exported 1 million barrels of crude oil through the ports of Sudan since the operation to do so resumed. Sudan's oil minister Azari Abdel Kadir says that the development is a result of efforts made by the Sudanese president Omar Hassan al-Bashir and his South Sudanese counterpart Salva Kiir to enact peace and stability in Africa's youngest country. Oil production in South Sudan was stopped after the civil war started there in 2013. South Sudan has the third largest oil reserves in sub-Saharan Africa.
This cooperation that we have started and we will continue to have should be turned into serious integration of our two countries and the region as a whole. Nowadays in the world, you cannot stand alone, you must be with somebody.
This ship that lies behind me carries 600,000 barrels. Another ship sailed from the Tom Thawat field in southern Sudan with the equivalent of 600,000 barrels.
Zimbabwe now. The unemployment rate over there continues to get worse and worse, despite several efforts by the government to revive much-needed economic growth and investment too. With President Emmerson Mnangagwa's latest turnaround plan, the government is hoping that Zimbabwe can eventually, over the long run, become a middle economy by 2030.
Zimbabwe, a once thriving economy in Africa, has over the past decades seen its worst economic meltdown. President Emmerson Mnangagwa's administration has implemented several strategies in an effort to turn around the country's situation. It plans to transform the nation into a middle-class country by 2030, a policy that has received mixed reviews from analysts.
The question to ask is there some coordinated thinking that pours into the same pool, so that then you don't get an impression that people are talking at cross purposes?
The problem with the visions is that they are meant to delay progress. So at the end of the day, visions become a charade. They become polished euphemism of a government that is deliberately trying to stifle and delay progress at the expense of colorful things that are meaningful in form of packaging visions.
However, other stakeholders generally believe Vision 2030 could work, but it would also need more consultation coupled with reviving various sectors.
Remember, any economy that is serious about, revitalizing its economy has got to focus on the reindustrialization. And this particular case is a situation where we are looking at ensuring that local industry is capacitated through provision and allocation of foreign currency, adequate foreign currency. And also by ensuring that ease of doing business is actually continued to receive attention.
With the year now over, it is now a wait-and-see game as 2030 is only but a few years ahead. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
South Africa, in the meantime, has reversed some of its stringent visa laws in time for the festive season. Now, these laws were put in place under the former Home Affairs Minister Malusi Gigaba back in 2015. They mandated at the time that all local and international visitors travelling with their children must produce unabridged birth certificates. At the time, the minister claimed that decision was triggered by a rise in child trafficking. That rise, however, turned out to not be factual. The government is now hoping that tourism numbers will significantly improve now that this red tape has been removed. CGTN's Sumitra Naidu explains.
All international travellers that have visas to South Africa will no longer need to produce unabridged birth certificates for their children, although those travelling to and from countries with visa waivers are encouraged to have the certificates on hand in case they are asked to present these upon entry to the country.
In countries where we require visas, that information about the particulars of the parents will already be there in our system, because we require that when you are doing your visa application. So there will be no more required to get those unabridged certificates. For the countries where there's visa waivers, we normally don't require such thing unless there's a suspicion our official may do spot checks. It is in that respect we still encourage you carrying those things, but it's not a requirement.
The new rules are official since December and have been widely welcomed. South Africans, though, still need to carry copies of their children's unabridged birth certificates.
I think we have prepared very well. We have increased our staff at our ports of entry by 425 people. And which we have moved from headquarters to come and assist so that there's a seamless, smooth movement of people and goods at our ports of entry. We are collaborating with the police, the revenue officials, the health officials, and it seems to be working very smoothly.
16 million tourists visited South Africa in 2017. That figure is expected to rise to 19.5 million by 2022.
Government has relaxed the rules to encourage more visitors to South Africa, but criminal elements remain a concern.
We advise that when you apply for these passports or visas, do give sufficient particulars about both parents, because we still have to protect children from being trafficked. We still have to protect children being smuggled in terms of the Child Act. That's a responsibility we have as a country which respects the basic human rights.
Tourism is a key sector for the South African economy, contributing almost 3% to GDP. Tourism is also a major employer. 1 in every 23 people work in tourism, and there's massive potential to expand on this. Government is confident the new visa amendments will improve visitor numbers to the country. Smitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
The speech made by China's President Xi Jinping at the conference celebrating China's 40th anniversary of economic reforms continues to attract attention around the world. These are some of the responses from South Africa.
China, I think, has benefited from globalization enormously. I mean, it's been able to sell its products around the world, and I think it's now playing a leading role in maintaining an open trading environment. I mean, initiatives like, for example, the Belt and Road Initiative or the BRICS Initiative. I mean, certainly what we see in Africa is that China is investing quite heavily in parts of Africa. Not so much South Africa, but in other countries around the continent. So that's a significant development, and I think we're seeing that Chinese companies investing not just in resources, but also in manufacturing production, which I think is what Africa needs.
I think what China has really done is make a very tangible success of a socialist developmental model. Very state-led and state-centered, but still very strong on marketization, on liberalized markets, on opening up to the rest of the world, on industrialization. So a lot of like the old growth models combined with a lot of neoliberal values, as well as very state-centric and very state-regulated. There's a model that developing countries can learn from there. Although the influence that China has had, particularly in other developing countries and giving them options for other sources of funding for infrastructure and so forth, I think has been particularly important. So those are things that can be learned.
It's 18:30 GMT. There's plenty more content coming up, including this. Facebook is in trouble again for allegedly misusing your data. And China confirms trade talks with the US will take place next month.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN. See the difference. Welcome back to the program. Let's recap the stories making you headlines at this hour. Hundreds of protesters in Sudan have taken to the streets to protest against price increases for bread and fuel. At least one person is reported to have been shot dead in these protests. Initially, they were concentrated in the towns of Adbara, Edama and Berber in the River Nile state, that's in the north of the country, but now they're seeming to be spreading to other regions as well. Sudanese police fired tear gas to disperse the protesters. Sunday's vote in the Democratic Republic of Congo has been pushed forward to the 30th of December. The Electoral Commission is blaming technical issues related to voting machines for this. The opposition has spoken against the use of these electronic voting machines. This comes a week after around 7,000 such electoral machines were burned in a fire. And finally, both candidates in Madagascar's presidential election have declared themselves unilaterally as winners in this fierce battle for the top position in the island nation. The two factions have been trading fraud allegations back and forth ever since the vote was cast. Analysts are warning that such sentiments could spill over into instability. Henry Rajoelina won about 39% of the vote in the first round, while Mac Ravalomanana came in second with 35.35% of votes cast. That's a run through your headlines. All right, then let's jump into the world of tech for a moment now. Facebook is coming under a new onslaught of public concern following the publication of a interesting and disturbing expose. The New York Times wrote that Facebook provides access of users' personal information, your data in essence, to other tech giants like Netflix and Spotify without your consent. It includes the ability to read your private messages without your consent. Now, earlier this year, the social media giant was under a lot of scrutiny after it was revealed that the British consulting firm Cambridge Analytica had harvested the personal data of millions of people's Facebook profiles without their consent and then used it very deliberately for political purposes. All right, then, so let's get a lot more data on this and a bit more from CGTN's Daniel Rangers, who joins us now live from Washington, D.C. Before I jump into Facebook, Daniel, I'm seeing quite the bloodbath in American markets at the moment. The Dow Jones down 1.84%, the S&P 500 down 1.46%. Tech companies seem to be the losers. What's happening here?
Well, there are times when the markets are rational and there are times when the markets are sort of emotional, if you think of it as a human mind. And at the moment, there's a lot of volatility. So the emotions of the market are very strong. President Trump urged the Federal Reserve to avoid raising rates and cutting off the retraction of quantitative easing. And what's happened is, because the Federal Reserve did what it said it was going to do against the wishes of the president, the markets reacted. And suddenly they've discovered that the idea of selling off $50 billion US per month, which they've been doing for months and months and months, is the justification for a massive sell-off. The reality is there's a lot of psychology here. We're at the late stages of a very strong bull market over several years, so people are anxious, when's that going to end? They are also, frankly, very anxious about the chaos at the heart of the Trump administration, which they think may jeopardize the chances of an agreement between the United States and China, which would, I think, open the gates to more confidence in the global trading environment going forward.
Indeed. Speaking of the market, away from the rate hike tantrum for a moment, the market has had a very negative reaction to this report from the New York Times. But also we're seeing the NAACP calling for a boycott of Facebook, and not just Facebook, but also WhatsApp and Instagram. What's the end goal there?
I think it's helpful for viewers to know that the NAACP is one of the pillars of American society, in that it has played a central role in civil rights for African Americans throughout the 20th century. The fact that the NAACP has weighed in on technology and Facebook's role in influencing society, I think, is very significant. One of the key issues, I think, here is a report that's just been published by a technology firm suggesting that one of the major attempts to influence the US electorate by Russian actors was targeting African Americans and using Facebook and Instagram, the incredible influencing power of those platforms, to persuade African Americans that Hillary Clinton was somehow demonic or evil or not worthy of their vote, or motivating them to vote. There are other issues that require the NAACP to feel that Facebook's role has civil rights implications, including the fact that they allow advertisers of housing to discriminate on the basis of socio-economic factors, which means that many African Americans can be excluded from certain adverts related to housing. So there are many issues here, but the very fact that this key civil rights organizations weighed in here is very significant, I think, for Facebook.
Indeed. So Mark Zuckerberg told lawmakers back in April, and remember we talked about this, he said that users have complete control over their data. But given what we now know, thanks to this investigation from the New York Times and a bunch of other institutions as well, he basically lied to legislators, didn't he?
I think Facebook's, in a sense, been very technically legalistic about defending its practices, in the sense that it's saying that all of these external actors were acting within the Facebook platform. So they were sort of like, you know, when you have a contractor coming into your building and they are charged with, you know, cleaning up or fixing the lights, or, you know, watering the plants, or whatever the job is, that essentially these external actors were coming into the Facebook platform and acting within it, and those were the terms of use. But it's a bit of a disingenuous argument, frankly, because many of these would be using data in order, for their own means, to target audiences with Facebook data and vice versa. So in other words, you know, there may be on the face of it a consent provided by users of Facebook for external parties, but the fact of the matter is the boundaries between what's in Facebook and what's used by external actors in terms of personal data is extremely blurry.
Indeed, it's a bit like that said contractor walking into a trading firm and then using share information to trade on their own account. That qualifies as insider trading as well. So in all, about 150 or so firms benefited from this data sharing arrangements that apparently were not public until now. But are these, strictly speaking, are they in breach of that 2011 settlement with the FTC? Because as I understand it, that barred Facebook from sharing user data without their permission.
Right. And I actually spoke to the person who originally launched the legal action against Facebook that led to the FTC ruling, Mark Rottenberg, executive director of Epic. And he's saying it's frankly mind-boggling that the FTC has not yet enforced that ruling on Facebook, and that Facebook has been egregious in ignoring the privacy protections that were put in place in 2011 following that action. So, yes, Facebook is, for the moment, not subject to any particular legal rulings, but the FTC has said that it is again looking at whether there have been violations. So that hangs over Facebook. And apart from that, the District of Columbia here, the nation's capital, its Attorney General has now launched a legal action related to all of those Facebook scandals in 2016 election. And that could also spell trouble for Facebook, because other attorneys general around the United States, in other states, could also look at that action and decide to launch parallel proceedings, which could, in the end, require Facebook not only to face many fines for its privacy actions, but also potentially a breakup or a change in the structure of its business in order to comply with any legal rulings going forward.
Right. One last question for you, and it's related to a lot of what you've just said here. So the FTC says it's looking into Facebook's operations again. But one, what's the latest on that? And beyond the challenges by the attorneys general, are there other legal challenges that could come somewhere in the horizon in 2019?
Well, I think that the FTC action, the pressure is mounting on them really to show some teeth, because for months and months, people have been taking pot shots at this regulator, saying that they've been highly ineffective. It's difficult to see when exactly they might take action, but certainly I think the pressure is building enormously on them to represent the privacy interests of the American people and beyond. Beyond that, of course, there is a lot of debate going on at the moment at the possibility that the US Congress will need to get its act together and put together a bunch of laws that actually secure the interests of the American people, in parallel to what's been going on in Europe, where there is a right to privacy. There is no right to privacy here in the United States, and I think there is a growing body of opinion among those in the technology sector, including members of some of the people who work within these tech organizations themselves, to really start to ramp up the legal protections for users, so that this Wild West attitude that we've seen in many of these tech companies, personified, I think, by Facebook the most, has to end at some point.
Indeed, and of course, Apple CEO Tim Cook has been pretty much right at the forefront of that. Facebook shares, as we speak, up about 0.2%. They're still down, though, by about 24% over the course of the year. That, of course, was Daniel Rangers speaking to us from Washington. Now then, China's Commerce Ministry has confirmed that Beijing and Washington are expected to hold fresh rounds of trade talks in January next year. The two sides have reportedly been closely talking about the finer details of those meetings. CGTN's Sun Tianyuan has the details.
The Chinese Ministry of Commerce Thursday confirmed its plan for January talks with Washington on trade issues. Trade tensions between the two sides have been improving since the Chinese and U.S. presidents sat down together at the recent G20 meeting in Argentina.
Both sides have been in close contact since the meeting between President Xi Jinping and his U.S. counterpart. We will arrange talks when needed to further implement the result of that meeting.
Xi and Trump agreed in Argentina to delay an increase of tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. Gao says China welcomed the decision and will in turn reduce tariffs on U.S. cars.
We believe if both sides can take care of each other's interests and work jointly in the same direction, we can implement the consensus reached by the heads of state.
Both sides have taken measures to send positive signals on trade. Gao calls the progress an important condition for fruitful consultation. The two sides also exchanged views on issues such as intellectual property rights during a vice ministerial level talk on Wednesday. The spokesperson adds that bilateral trade and cooperation have played an important role in promoting China-U.S. relations over the years, and he says the two nations should further utilize the potential of trade and cooperation despite their differences. Sun Tianyuan, CGTN, Beijing.
Now, you all remember earlier in the show, I spoke briefly about the Tesla founder, Elon Musk. He's unveiled a section of the underground tunnel beneath Los Angeles, which he says is going to be the first step in changing mass transit. This tunnel will eventually allow cars to travel at speeds of over 200 kilometers an hour. But as CGTN's Phil Leveld now reports, the project itself is making rather slow progress.
Here's the problem. And here's the solution.
It will be smooth as glass.
A vision of the future, at least in the eyes of Elon Musk, officially revealed on Tuesday. A stretch of tunnel beneath the busy streets of Los Angeles.
You can weave the boring system tunnel network into the fabric of a city without changing the character of the city. The city will still feel the same. You're not going to get in anyone's way. You're not going to obstruct anyone's view.
This is a test route just over a mile long. And this, the end goal. Passengers whizzing along at speeds of up to 155 miles per hour or 249 kilometers an hour.
It would be incredible if you could travel around LA, New York, DC, Chicago, Paris, London, anywhere at 150 miles an hour. That'd be phenomenal.
A work in progress, but it's getting there.
You could literally build enough tunnels to transport everyone in the United States in LA. There is no limit.
Elon Musk says he wants to solve the problem of LA's soul-destroying traffic. And you know, he has got a point. This is a place where it feels you are constantly sitting in the car and yet not going anywhere. In fact, one study labeled Los Angeles as the most congested city in the world. It's as bad as you can get. LA given that title 6 years in a row now by transport analysts INRIX, claiming motorists spent an average of 102 hours on the freeways during rush hours last year, making it worse than both Moscow and New York City, California neighbour San Francisco in 5th place. Let's say these tunnels do come to fruition. What kind of difference are they going to make? Like, how much does LA really need these?
Oh God, the sad thing is, if you look at the plans, things are just going to get worse in Los Angeles over the next few years, couple decades. So anything will help, right? I mean, we just have to do public transportation. We have to do alternative transportation. We have to get people out of cars. So can they help? Yes. Is it going to be easy? No. Is it going to be expensive? Probably. But is it part of the solution? I would hope so. The project has hit some snags along the way. The